Thank you.
Okay, and here we go. I'm going to pin your screen, so you will be highlighted.
Thank you.
So hi, everybody. And we're very happy to welcome you to this extremely special session today. A very unique session in the Indelible Festival of Literature, one that covers a very important aspect of everyone's life, which is education and storytelling, of course. We all know that this is among the very first methods of learning, and the ones that actually stick in our minds are the best stories that we are told. And it's a great honor to have you with us today, Zach. And we'd like to give a moment to thank our sponsors for the festival and for all the events. First of all, we'd like to thank the American University in Dubai, the Università Gabriele D'Annunzio in Italy, EBSCO Host Information Services, Montessori Academy Australia, Pedagogy and Beyond, Salmon Poetry, and the International Association for Jungian Studies. For those who don't know me, I am Rula Maria, editor of Indelible, and my lovely co-host who is with us here today is Dr. Nadira Alborno, who will also be moderating the session with me today. And before we introduce the wonderful Zach, I would just like to remind everybody to please keep your mics muted at all times in order to avoid any interfering background noise. And there will be a Q&A session after the talk, so you have the option to either put in your questions in the chat box or use the raise hand button or the raise hand function, and we can call on you so that you would ask Zach the questions directly via the mic. So without further ado, I know that most of you are here to listen to Zach explain the vital role of literature, specifically storytelling, in the early learning years, particularly from a Montessori perspective. Zach will discuss some of her favorite storytelling methods and their impact on children. And I will now hand it over to Nadira so that Nadira will tell you more about Zach.
Thank you. It's so nice to have everyone here. Lunchtime in Dubai, and I believe evening in Australia, and maybe very early in somewhere else in the world. Welcome, Zach. Zuzana Zachar is a hands-on Montessori educator with full-time in the classroom teaching involvement for 40 years, from infants to adult learners, and with 37 years in Montessori education. She's a member of the American Montessori Society, trained for Montessori 3 to 6 years and 9 to 6 years. She has a vast experience in the United States as a trainer for several AMS training centers, and she's also a presenter at AMS conferences. Most recently, Zach has done Montessori training in Hangzhou and Beijing in China, and is currently working with Montessori Academy Group Australia to facilitate the training of early childhood educators in Montessori method as they work to provide the experience to as broad a population as possible. We welcome you with us today, and we are eager to hear about the art of storytelling in Montessori education. We're so happy to have you, so we're just all ears.
Well, thank you very kindly. Thank you very kindly for your beautiful welcome. And I'd like to thank Rula Maria and everyone for allowing me to join this very august company. I feel a little as an outlier, so thank you very much. So, gather round. I want to tell you a story. Not so very long ago, a very nice person surprised me while I was working away with a phone call. Ring, ring! I was startled. It was an unexpected noise in the quiet. Hello, Zach, how are you? Just a quick question. How are you about storytelling in Montessori? I laughed. You know me and storytelling, and especially Montessori, was my reply. I love to tell a story. So here I am. I know that you've said that I'll be talking about storytelling, particularly in the 3 to 6 environment in Montessori. But as with any story, as I started to think and to write about what I wanted to say, it took its own path. And so I'll begin with a quote from T.S. Eliot, who I notice is also quoted on the Indelible website. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And so I'm going to begin my meandering. For storytelling in the Montessori tradition starts with Maria Montessori herself. And what a story that is. I always like to start training sessions with a review of Dr. Montessori's life. And I do this because the story of her life is so amazing. And the educators I work with are often unaware of how big and how full her life was. So Maria Montessori was born at the end of the 19th century, and she was the only child in a middle-class family. Her mother had a very strong social conscience, and from a very young age, she had Maria doing handwork, sewing and knitting clothes for those who were less fortunate than herself. She was a very strong and very early influence in Maria's life, and she was to stay as a strong supporter throughout her life. Maria, as a young student, was not a particularly academic student, but this changed when she made the decision as a 13-year-old to attend a technical school for high school. It was a very unusual move, as this was the domain of male students. And so from about the age of 13 on, she started on this amazing path of defying social conventions. I could go on endlessly, and those of you who know me are probably at this point rolling your eyes, so I'll summarize just the highlights of Maria's life. She pursued this technical education, and then upon graduation decided she wanted to join the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Rome. She was initially refused entry, and this is largely believed to have been as a result of her gender. And the story goes that as she left her interview, she stood up and she turned to the professor and she said, "I know that one day I shall become a doctor." It's also believed that through the intercession of Pope Leo, she eventually was accepted into the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Rome, where in those early years of her studies, she endured a great deal of harassment and bullying from her peers, and even to some extent from her professors. She also had to deal with her father's extreme opposition to her choice, even though he shepherded and chaperoned her to and from her classes. She persevered, and eventually she won the respect of all of the people that she came into contact with. She was a very dedicated student who really enjoyed her subject, and she began to win over her peers and her professors and even her father. And over time, she won a number of scholarships that allowed her to continue with her education. She graduated towards the end of the 19th century as the first woman doctor in Italy. And she was quickly taken on board at the hospital that was attached to the University, where she very quickly developed a reputation for being a holistic carer, particularly for women and children. At the same time, she was also invited to speak in Berlin at the International Women's Conference, where she set up to argue at the turn of the century for the equal pay for equal work for women. And I mention this because so often I think that aspect of her life is overlooked. She was part of that cadre of feminists that came through at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that heralded a new wave in the feminist movement. As I said, she started on this path of defying social conventions. She had a child out of wedlock, and she kept him secret and hidden until he was in his teens, at which point she invited him back into her life, and he became her lifelong collaborator in the work that she was doing. Through her work in medicine, she was connected to the psychiatric department at the university. And through that, she began to work with the so-called, and I'm using air quotes, idiot children. And I use that term because that was the term that was used at the time. And this involvement with these children marks her shift from medicine to education. And it was her application of the scientific method and her reliance on the observation of the children that allowed her to develop new approaches for these children and achieve amazing results. And then in 1907, she was given the opportunity to apply these methods to the normal children. And at this point, the Montessori method takes off and her story continues. She starts to give trainings in the methodology. The word of her method spreads across the world. People seek her out. She travels and she extends her method. She was also an extremely strong advocate for peace. She addressed the League of Nations on Peace and Education because she strongly believed that with the right form of education, humanity was capable of being saved. She was so distressed by the actions of World War I that part of her drive in developing her method was to find the right education to prepare the next generation to be more peaceful. She fought fascism in the early 1930s when Hitler was burning books of philosophers and writers that contravened the Nazi philosophy. Her books were included in the book burnings. The Montessori schools in Germany at the time were shut. She had a headquarters in Barcelona in Spain, and the rise of Franco forced her to leave Spain. And then later, Mussolini in Italy, who had originally taken on Montessori for the whole of the education system in Italy, overnight shut down all the Montessori schools when she refused to endorse fascism. Just before the outbreak of World War II, she traveled to India and then to give courses there. And while she was there, the war broke out. And as Italian citizens in a British colony, they were treated as enemy aliens. And so her son, Mario, was interned in an enemy alien camp, but the respect for her was so great that she was placed instead under house arrest and was able to continue giving courses. She remained in India for the duration of the war, and over that time educated thousands of Indian women, particularly in the Montessori method. So she had this big, rich, full life. She lived till she was 85. And in that time, she never stopped thinking and observing and extending her ideas. Anyway, I've gone on far too long about Maria, but as I said, it was a story that I needed to tell. So I started with a story about Maria, and I'm talking about storytelling in Montessori. Now, storytelling in Montessori actually starts with Montessori teacher training. This is where that oral tradition begins. For face-to-face training, and the majority of Montessori training programs are still presented in this way, even in this increasing digital age, from 1909, when she presented her first training program, the mode of delivery was lectures and demonstrations. And that mode continues as a contemporary oral tradition today. So the knowledge is transmitted orally. The explanations, the how and the whys of the method are told orally. Montessori training is based on spoken language. It's a form of advocacy by anecdote. Trained Montessorians transmit the Montessori tradition and knowledge orally from one generation of educators to the next. Maria herself rarely used notes in her lectures, and so the lectures varied from course to course. In fact, a lot of the publications that are in her name are actually compilations of lecture notes taken by students and by colleagues. You know, unlike the digital explosion that exists today, where we need something, we can go to Google, we type it in, and 100,000 hits come up in 27 seconds. There existed no comprehensive published source or textbook, so to speak, of the materials and the activities that constitute Montessori pedagogy. The delivery was oral. And much of that our training still draws from that tradition. So that's where our oral storytelling foundation begins. It starts at the training. In fact, Montessori curriculum stories are integral to our practice and presentations. They're not an add-on. Maria designed the program so that we would tell stories to children. The well-known and highly respected Montessorian and Montessori storyteller in particular, Dr. Michael Dorr, makes the point that somewhere between 60,000 to 100,000 years ago, humans began to speak. And I really love the way he says this. He says that we're not quite sure when it was. It was somewhere in that time, because words don't leave fossils. And he does this to highlight the point that storytelling is hardwired in our DNA. It is ingrained in us, and it goes back deep in time to when humans began to develop speech. In fact, there is no society we know of that exists without an oral tradition. And so at this point, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I am speaking today, the people of the Tharal Nation. The First Nation peoples of Australia are regarded as the oldest continuous living culture on the earth today. And their traditions are oral storytelling traditions that exactly reflect what I'm talking about. The elders, the holders of wisdom and knowledge, are deeply revered. And that's the case in many Indigenous cultures throughout the world. And storytelling is regarded as a high art form akin to a spiritual act. So storytelling is ingrained in our DNA. We are all storytellers. Every one of us has a story to tell. So I'll start with myself. How does this person, born to displaced persons in Australia after World War II, and named after the character in her mother's favourite children's book, come to be sitting here talking to you? Is it that my Montessori trainer in the US was trained by Derma Petrudis, who herself was trained by Maria Montessori in Paris in 1924? Is it that my dedication and passion for education was passed to my DNA from my great-grandfather, who was appointed by President Masaryk at the formation of the new Republic of Czechoslovakia after World War I to develop the primary school curriculum for the new nation? I don't know. But it is this holistic, big picture, the interconnectedness of it all that so inspires me about Montessori. And I continue, even after all these years, to be in awe of how it all threads and comes together, just as the threads of our lives come together. Storytelling, as was mentioned, is a very deeply human action. It is more than the transmission of information. It's the art of communion and communication with others. And it can't occur in an empty room. It needs a teller and a listener. And it relies on the use of language, on gesture, facial expression, movement, the ability to call an image to mind by the storyteller in the listener. It's not a recitation of a script. And so the storyteller puts an element of themselves into the story every time they tell it. And through that, the story begins to vary and change each time it is told. As Michael Dorr says to us, we need to remember that our stories are memorable gifts to the children that we tell them to. But before we explore storytelling in Montessori classrooms, let's just look a little as to why it's so important that we don't lose this very beautiful aspect of our classrooms. You know, what do we know about storytelling? How does storytelling enhance children's development? Well, as I said earlier, we know that it's at least a 60,000-year-old tradition that crosses all cultures. It engages the imagination, it captures the imagination, and it helps it to grow. And when this imagination is linked up with creativity, which is the highest of the higher order thinking skills, then the brain fires up. So much of what Montessori spoke about and observed and wrote about was based on the observation of children from 0 to 6 years of age. And we know now, and modern science and advances in science absolutely support the work that she was doing and writing about all those years ago. We know that it's a time of massive change in the development of the brain. And it's also a critical time for the development and acquisition of language, what Montessori calls the sensitive periods. And so the storytelling is vitally important. The human brain also carries its cultural heritage. And in this digital age, to tell a story, to speak, to gesture, to build relationships, to make eye contact, to establish one-on-one interaction remains one of the strongest ways to create a bond between humans, between the educator and the child, the teller and the listener, human-to-human interactions. We know children love stories. Stories evince a sense of joyfulness, wonderment, excitement, fun, maybe even trepidation, and especially if they're told in an evocative way. They've been at the heart of human culture from the beginning. For as long as we have known, people have been telling stories to answer questions. Why am I here? How did I get here? What's my purpose? What does the future hold? Where does the sun go at night? Stories allow children to develop their cultural literacy. It gives them knowledge for how to traverse and navigate their world competently and respectfully. Stories allow children to learn about each other, to feel connected to each other, to find those commonalities. They're a way of knowing, and they strengthen a child's social emotional intelligence. They help the development of empathy, critical thinking skills. They heighten their awareness of their relationship to and their place in the world. We know that all stories hold an element of truth in them. They wouldn't hold up if they didn't hold that element of truth, if we couldn't recognize a grain of truth in them, because it's that truth that forms the connection for us to engage with the story. And we know, fiction works in exactly that way. We also know that stories speak to us in ways that direct instruction doesn't. To quote Rudyard Kipling, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. So the human brain is hardwired to take in information orally. And as we tell our stories, it helps children understand in different ways. In other words, storytelling is another way that we engage children in learning in our classrooms. Humans, by their very nature, find meaning in narrative. Maria Montessori believed that children's interests came in part through stimulating their imagination and helping them find connections. She felt that they too were asking the same questions that I mentioned earlier, and they wanted to find those answers so they could place themselves into this big world into which they were born. And so we tell them stories which they use to create a framework on which to build knowledge and assimilate information. They connect new knowledge with prior knowledge. They connected with their hands-on use of the materials and their observations of the demonstration of the materials and the stories that have come with them. And so with our stories, we start with the infants that are in our care, the babies that are in our care. And here we, with infants and with babies, we tell an ongoing story of what is happening in the world around them. It's a commentary of what's happening around us. We're putting words to their impressions. Oh, we've changed your diaper, your nappy, and you're clean now. I have something that I'd like to show you. Oh, You like it. It feels good when I bounce you, doesn't it? Yes. I'd like to bring you, I've set up a pillow in the reading rug, and I'd like to show you something. I've got something hidden in my bag. Let me put you down. You're sitting comfortably, everything's good. Okay, here's my bag. I've got something to show you. Ooh. What do you see? Would you like to feel it? Yes, it's soft and it's silky. It's a toy that looks like a frog. It's not a real frog. A real frog would have a wet skin, but you can feel it, yes. It's a frog. Would you like to see it? Ooh. That's right, I have something else in my bag. Okay. Oh, what do I have this time? Oh, and it makes a noise. Listen to that. Oh, do you want to see it? Yeah. Oh, when you shake it, it makes a different noise. And you see that the belly on this frog is yellow? Yes. It's, would you like to feel it? It's soft. This is a small frog. This is a big frog. And you know what? I still have one more thing in my bag. This frog's different. It's made from wood. It's hard. Would you like to feel? Oh, it's hard. That's right. But this frog makes a noise as well. It sounds like a frog might sound. And so, as we're presenting and giving these experiences to the children, we are talking and telling them. We are putting the words that go with their impressions. As I said earlier, we know that developmentally, those first 5 to 6 years are absolutely critical for language development. And the past decades or half a century even have produced an enormous body of research and literature stressing the importance of children experiencing language in all manner of forms: conversation, poetry, songs, reading stories, telling stories, hearing stories, for language and for literacy development in children. You know, for decades now, we've heard the importance of reading stories to children. And it concerns me more and more that I hear from children and from parents that the story that they heard at school today was read to them online through an app. The primary language instruction in schools is literacy-based, and literacy is a human invention. It's something that began around 5,500 to 6,000 years ago when humans began to read and to write. In our practices, I'm sorry, my cat's coming to visit. In our practices, we read stories to children. We engage them at the appropriate developmental level in concepts of print, the pattern of the story, the narrative structure, characters, problem, solution. But the stories that are written become bound by the written word. And I would argue, just as the stories that are digitally delivered are bound by their delivery mode. I'm going to tell you a story here. As a young child, my parents always read me a good night story. And my father would come and he would, and I was quite young, and he would say, "What story would you like to hear tonight?" And I had a favorite story. And for a very long time, apparently, that was the only story that I wanted to hear, Little Red Riding Hood. And so he dutifully read Little Red Riding Hood one night. He dutifully read it the next night. And this went on for a while. And then one night he sat down and he opened I gave him the book, the story, and he opened the book and he started reading. "No, that's not the story. No, it doesn't go like that. Once upon a time, there..." And he stopped me and he kept on reading. No, that's not the story. So he held up the page and he said, "Well, the picture hasn't changed, but you see that there are black lines on the page and there are white lines on the page. Tonight, I'm reading the white lines." In other words, he felt that he was constrained by the written word. There's a fluid dynamism and openness in the telling of stories. And as we tell stories, we make the foundation for literacy, even more so than the reading of stories. You know, as we tell our stories, we enhance listening skills. As those skills develop, the child is then able to incorporate the ideas that they're hearing and they internalize them. And with that internalization, they begin to develop their own understanding. And then they're able to express those ideas in their own words. You know, all those elements of literacy, reading, writing, character, print concepts, you know, problem resolution, all of those things exist and have their foundations in storytelling and in listening. So as we tell these stories, children begin to discover the patterns of stories. The narrative structure is there. The story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a problem and a solution. They're able to see the how and why through observation and creativity, the problem can be solved. And another thing that storytelling does is it bunches information together in a way that just reading can't do. We know that children become better storytellers and can take a point of view when they hear strong oral stories. And so in our 3 to 6 environment, we want to tell good fictional stories. And I say fictional stories because our stories in the Montessori tradition are based on what we teach, and our curriculum is based on the world into which the child has been born. So now I'll tell you some stories. One of the very first stories that a child might hear in the 3 to 6 environment in Montessori is the story of me, or in this case, the story of them. Sometimes it's called the birthday walk. So for this, and I'm going to move my camera down, we have, and this will vary from classroom to classroom, and again, it's an oral tradition. It is dependent on the teller and it will vary accordingly. So we have our sun, or we have a representation that comes with that, and we'll lay out our months of the year. So, sure. I have my friends with me and I'm going to say, you know, there's somebody here today who has something very special that they'd like to share with us? That's right, Josie, it's you. What's special about today for you? Yes, that's right. It's your birthday, isn't it? Would you like to come on up? On your way, collect the globe, because you know what we're going to do. We're going to bring our globe. Now you need to be very careful because I'm going to light the candle. Remember to put your hands behind the back. So let's look at our candle. What can we see in our candle? If I was to turn the lights off, what would you see? That's right. You would still have light because the candle, the fire, gives us light. And we had to be very careful because it is hot. Fire is hot. The candle represents the light and the heat that we get from the sun. And we're going to take a walk around our sun today because we know that it takes the Earth a year to travel around the sun. So, have you got your globe? Okay. And now I begin to tell the story. A year ago, on this day, 8th of April, in a hospital, Josie's mummy and daddy were so happy. They were so excited. Their beautiful baby girl had been born. And they looked at her and they held her and they were so very happy. They decided to call this beautiful baby Josie. And Josie cried loudly. And they were pleased because it meant she had a good set of lungs and she was breathing well. And she started to suck and they fed her. And over the year, Josie drank lots of milk. She started to grow. She started to roll over. She learned slowly to push herself up. She learned to sit up. She began to eat solids and she would feed herself. And then she learned to push herself up and slowly she learned to crawl. And then as she was getting older, she got strong enough to pull herself up. And she started to stand. And she was beginning to get ready to walk. Okay, so let's take a walk around the sun. The Earth goes around the sun. The Earth goes around the sun. The Earth goes around the sun. And Josie is 1. Can we clap 1 for Josie? And so we continue telling this story. Sometimes we might have photographs that have been sent in. Sometimes the parents may come and tell the story. And then as we come through the years, I might finish with, and today, how old are you, Josie? You are 5. Well, yesterday you were 4. When you were 4, what was your favorite thing to do? You like to play with your friends. Yes, we do love to play with our friends. But now that you're 5, what do you think you would like to do and learn now that you are 5 years old? And she would tell us, and then as she blew out her candle, we might sing happy birthday or something along that line to her. So that is one of the very first stories that we tell tell with our students. We need to remember that young children of this age don't have a linear sense of time. We know that, you know, in little over a week, it will be Easter, and a lot of children will be getting excited about that. But if we talk in that term of it's a week away, it's too abstract and too nebulous for children. We might need to talk about it as being in terms of 8 sleeps. And the same applies in reverse. So if I'm going to tell them a story about something that happened back in time, I need to set the story and take them back in time. So I might gather my children with me and I might say, I want to tell you a story today that happened at a time long, long ago. And back long, long ago, there were no buildings. You know that when we go outside and we look around and we can see all those buildings? There were no buildings. There wasn't a building like our school. There was no place like our classroom. There weren't even buildings far apart. There were no roads, no cars, no bicycles. In fact, there was probably nothing that even looked like a wheel. There was no tap to turn on to get our water from. There were people, but they didn't dress like you and I. So I might use something like this to take the children back to maybe if I wanted to talk about Australia at the time prior to the arrival of Europeans, and I want to set the scene for the children for the story that I'm going to tell them. And I might use something like that as an introduction for them. We use stories to introduce ideas and concepts. So just as the seasons are cyclical, our stories become cyclical. So it's, for example, it's springtime. During the springtime, we will revisit planting, and I might gather my children together and tell them a story of the seed. So I might say, today, before we go outside, I want to tell you the story of the seed. And if you like, you can imagine that you're a seed. And maybe after I've told the story, we might retell it and we can act it out together. Now, there are lots of different kinds of seeds. They come in all shapes and sizes. They're a lot like us. We come in all different shapes and sizes too, don't we? But every seed has 3 things that are the same. Every seed has a strong outer shell, a seed coat. We call it the seed coat. And its job is to protect what's inside the seed. And it has super sensing powers that tell it when the time is right for the seed to begin to grow. So the outside of the seed is called the seed coat. Inside the seed is the baby plant. It's called the embryo. And everything else in the seed is the food that that plant needs to begin to grow. And that is called the endosperm. Now, the seed is going to be put into the ground. We're going to dig just a little hole. We don't want to put it in too deep because it may not be able to push its way up through the soil. Dig a little hole, and we're going to put the seed in the hole and give it just a light coat of dirt to protect it and hide it from something that might come along and eat it. And then we're going to water the soil and wait for the sun to warm it. And those super sensing powers in the coat of in that seed coat will begin to feel the water and the warmth, and they'll send the message to the embryo inside that this is a good time to start growing. And the very first thing that will begin to grow will come out from the bottom of the seed. You can put a foot out for that and push out, and it's the root. And the root is going to go down, down, down into the soil. And it's going to start looking for water and nutrients. And a little time after that, in the opposite direction, the shoot with the leaves will begin to push up out of the seed and push its way through the soil and open up its leaves when it comes out. And then it will have used all its food, and it will be able to use its food factory in its leaves to begin to make food for itself. So this might be a way that I introduce the seed and I tell my story to the children doing that. Another way that we tell our stories is also through our continent studies. We have continent books or continent boxes with pictures. And I might gather my children around me, and I might bring my globe with me. And I'm going to say, today we're going to take a trip to a new continent. Now, you know that usually when we travel to a continent, I suggest we might like to fly because it's faster than taking a boat. But in the continent we're going to visit today, the only way to get there is to go by boat. And that continent is Antarctica. It's on the southern end of our Earth. Let me show you some pictures. And I might take the pictures from my book and start to hand them around to the children. Take them out and let them pass them around and examine them. And I'd let them look at the pictures. And then I'd ask, what are you seeing? What are you noticing about the land? And they might tell me, oh, there's lots of snow and lots of water. Yes, that's right. There is a lot of snow because Antarctica is a big mass of land that's all covered in ice and snow. That's why you don't see any green there. It's so cold that it's hard for plants to grow there. And to travel there, you need a special boat because the ice forms on the water and you need a special boat. It's called an icebreaker that has a very strong hull that can break through the ice in the water to get you to the land. There's something really I find very interesting about Antarctica. You know that in all the other continents we've visited, we've had pictures of people and the people who live there. But in Antarctica, when they discovered it, they found that there weren't any people living there. There were living things, the ones that lived on the land and the water, the penguins and the seals. And then there were a lot of animals that lived in the water, like the whales and different starfish and things. And very importantly, the tiny little krill that are the food for the humpback whales. But there were no people living there. And so the people of the world got together and decided that they would share the responsibility for looking after Antarctica. And they would use it as a place for science. And so there are different research stations there from different countries around the world where scientists come together and study the climate and the animals and the land, and they share their information. And so we are laying the foundations at this age. We're fertilizing the imagination. We're deepening active listening. And this is all in preparation for the child moving out into the bigger world and trying to take in this information for themselves in their own way. And as the child moves into the elementary years of the Montessori curriculum, the place of the stories gets even bigger. There are big new themes that are introduced, and the 5 great stories: the formation of the earth, the coming of life, the coming of man, the story of language, the story of mathematics. And these are told not to impart information, you know, masses and reams of factual information. They're told in such a way to provoke curiosity in the child, in the how and the why. They're designed to inspire the child to find out more and to stimulate their interests and to encourage them to go and research and find out their own stories and create their own stories. But that is for another time. So to conclude, I just want to say stories are many times more memorable than facts alone. And the power of the orally delivered story lays a foundation and a connection that we really must never lose sight of. And so I come back to where I began. We shall not cease for exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So thank you very kindly.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was brilliant. Your storytelling in itself is a piece of art. And I was wondering all the time, where were you when I was in kindergarten? That was amazing.
So
captivating. Thank you so much.
So captivating, Zach. Really, you just took us on so many journeys, and it was just so captivating. As you were speaking, I was just wondering, you know, you made a very important point for me here, which is about technology. Because as an educator and a teacher educator here, I stand all the time. I don't want to say that I'm fighting against technology, but maybe I'm fighting for humanity, so that technology does not take over. And I think storytelling is one part which should be human and not be done by a machine. Although although this, I mean, there's a human behind the machine who is telling the story, but still, what you showed us today is the heightened emotions, the animation, the connection. I feel I'm very connected to you as you are speaking. I don't think this is possible behind the screen, no matter, even if it was someone who's very animated, it's not the same. I mean, I wish I was just sitting in front of you to touch all the things that you were showing us, which is what would be happening in a real classroom. So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on the challenge of technology, you know, taking over in so many wonderful human interactions that we don't want to really give up? And I'm just going to add one little thing here, because you said about Maria Montessori starting with students with disabilities, to start with, his earlier start was with disability, that they always say, but no, I mean, we have to bring in technology because it provides accessibility for people with disability, like having an audiobook or having, you know, all kinds of other accessible devices. So maybe you can just elaborate on this a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. You know, the reason I took the route that I did was because like you, I agree with you. I'm not, it is a fight for humanity, very much. I fear when I fear that that if we rely and we give over to technology too much, I have difficulty expressing it, but you know, I think for me it was you know, it's that as I said, that human to human interaction that is so critical. And I think, you know, for the world, it's coming out of 2 years of you know, of lockdown, where, you know, we were very grateful to have access to this technology. I know, you know, for us as a company, we were able to at least reach out to a myriad of our students, and we tried very hard to keep them connected and to keep that going. But we also know that for the, you know, for the children, even if they were attending the lessons and the classes and connecting, when they've come back into the classroom, they've lost that ability to be great. No, I don't want to say to be gracious to each other, but when we're together all the time, we learn to, it's about learning to interact and to be together. You know, Montessori calls it the lessons of grace and courtesy. And we learn how to interact with each other. We learn the norms of existing together. And because we're there face to face, day to day, person to person. And we have to physically take into account that person. That doesn't happen when you've got a flat screen in front of you, you know, that I can, you know, do this and I'm not going to bump into you. So I'm not sure that I'm actually answering your question. I think what I'm doing more is agreeing with you and saying that you know, it's a call for me, to all of us, to always keep in mind that human interaction is so incredibly important, and we can't lose, as you said, that aspect of our humanity. I know personally, one of the reasons I tell these stories and do that in training is I notice even to sing songs now, our educators are putting on devices, you know, and it's entertainment, you know, that the children don't, you know, it's noise, it's background. They're not interacting with anything. Whereas if you're leading the song, you can read your audience. Oh, oh, we're loving this song, and we've had 5 frogs. How about 5 more frogs coming and jumping in? And it become, again, it's the dynamic of it that I think is so incredibly important.
Thank you for saying that about the songs, because I believe that a teacher with a guitar in the classroom, if he can play an instrument, is a lot more impactful than actually playing something on the machine. So thank you for giving that example.
Oh, yeah. Look, and I am the world's worst singer, but I can get up and sing a song and engage a group of children. And it's because I'm there doing it with them. That, you know, we know that humans react to humans. So, yeah.
We have a question here from Nisreen Miziani, and she says, do you have any suggestions for making sure the audience are engaged throughout telling a story? Sometimes an interesting story does not cut it.
That's absolutely true. Now, one of the things that we say with our stories is, you know, I was telling the story, I had it in mind, but I was demonstrating what it was. As you made the point, we weren't together. And this is one of the things as we've had to go online that we've been finding we're struggling with, whether I'm dealing with adults or with children. You know, if I have a group in a room, I read the room. So, you know, I keep my stories short. I add you know, I have an idea of what I want to say, but it's done. I start short, I add if the audience is there. If the audience isn't with me, I'm not going to force them to sit. You know, what's the point? What are they going to learn? And what they're going to learn is, she wants me to sit. I have to sit. I don't want to be here. There's no engagement. So, you know, in a Montessori setting, if some of the children are engaged, we can keep them going, and the others I might invite to go and to choose an activity or work and to go to work. Or if the group as a whole isn't you know, it isn't working, I'll change my tack and I'll go somewhere else. So you know, you know, you have to learn to read your audience. And don't force it, because the forcing, then it becomes a form of instruction as opposed to a form of engagement.
Anyone else would have like to ask? Please just, I think, just put your microphone on and ask.
Yes, feel free to take the plunge and use the mic. In the meantime,
I was going to say, I know I talked for a long time and I went over, so maybe people need to move on as well.
I think
you know, yeah, someone is there. It's like I saw a hand and then it disappeared, but if anyone wants to say something.
Maybe Joanne was have a question.
Was it Joanne?
Because I see her microphone is on.
Oh, okay.
That's the problem with online.
Maybe there's a connection to audio. Yeah, that's the curse and the blessing of being online at the same time, you know. It's great that we're together, but sometimes the mic. Genevieve, did you have a question?
Yeah. It's not a question, but I would like to support our speaker for today. Actually, I've been teaching in a Montessori classroom for 6 years. And then when there was this transition to online, there was just a very different magic when I try to look back, there's this magic of storytelling when you do it face to face, which you cannot really just basically connect. There's this spiritual bonding that's happening inside the classroom, which you cannot give online. Even if you tried a lot, maybe 50%, yes, but I just want to say this, that there's this magical spiritual bonding happen in a classroom when you do it face to face with the children. So yeah, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you, and thank you for your comment. I absolutely agree with you that, you know, I can't encourage educators enough to take that step to tell those stories, you know. And I think, you know, as a Montessorian, I'm sure that you understand that the beauty of that ability to tell the story, to have that open flow to do it, which, you know, maybe in other settings we're a little more restricted. But, you know, I'm eternally grateful that we have that in our practice. So thank you for your comment.
I like how you you called it before, Zach. You called it a means of communion. I really like that. And this is similar to what Genevieve said, the magic or the spiritual aspect of being face to face during storytelling. So yes, I mean, it's beyond communication. You could have communication through technology, but being there face to face, this does add the communion aspect to it as well. And I really like that. I like the way you put it this way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do you see anything from your end, Nadira?
No, there are no more questions. Just maybe I can make just one more comment before. You said about the advocacy by anecdote, or the delivery was always oral. I love that phrase, advocacy by anecdote, because, you know, when I think about spiritual studying, like all religions, when you deliver the teachings, it's always based on oral connect, because if you really want to touch the heart, touching the heart happens when you have that oral connection. You know, when you do that, as you said, I mean, I can't put it better, but advocacy by anecdote. I like that. I like that very much. I think I'm going to be talking about this a lot more because I believe in it so much. The face-to-face learning, the discussion. Although I'm a big fan of reading, and I speak a lot about reading in my classrooms, and I always say you meet people in life, but you meet people in books as well, and you can connect with the people in the books. But I still, as an adult, I actually sit with my friend and we read for each other. And I think it's a wonderful thing to do. I wish more people would do that, because you get a lot more than just reading alone.
Oh, and I wasn't trying to say don't read. I just felt that what I really was trying to say is take the plunge and take that next step and have the confidence, you know, as well as read, because I love to read as well. I love to, and children's books for me in particular are beautiful because, you know, in 32 pages, you have that amazing, you know, you tell a whole story in 32 pages through just a few words and the interaction of the words and the illustrations working together. And so much is, you know, there's just so much communicated with really so little. And, you know, so I am an enormous advocate of reading books, and you know, I have an enormous library of children's books because they're amazing. But I think what I really wanted to say was I want to advocate for us to just be a little bit brave and move to that next step. You know, it's the same as sing that song, even if you can't sing, you know, just take that leap, because you will, you know, it's that ultimate connection that we can have with the child.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
It's amazing. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And as you said, children like to touch things and they like to feel with their hands, and the sound of the voice in real time is a little different than, as you put it, being bound by the mode of delivery through technology. I mean, we're not saying it's all bad, or the mode of.
And no, I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was greatly enlightening, Zach. That was amazing.
Very kindly. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll just give one last call for the audience and see if anyone has a question to ask or anything else to add. I guess this is it.
Okay. Well, thank you very kindly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach, for your time. We really appreciate it. And what you're doing is just wonderful. And this, this awareness that you are creating in so many people, the parents, the educators, and everybody. This is real treasure. So thank you. And the kids are so lucky to have you with them.
Absolutely.
Thank you very kindly. Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank
It's
you.
been
And should we wish you a good
pleasure.
evening now? So now it's evening time.
Yes, and I'll wish you a good rest of the day. And
Thank you.
we'll say goodbye.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay,
Great
thank
one.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.